for thousands of years, before Germany became one of the world's most powerful nations, before its famous castles, legendary cars, brilliant scientists, or even its darkest chapters, there was only wilderness, endless forests, frozen rivers, and small groups of people fighting every single day, just to survive. Yet hidden inside these ancient lands was the beginning of a story that would eventually change Europe forever. A story filled with fearless warriors, powerful empires, betrayal, religious revolutions, world wars, division, and one of history's greatest comebacks. But here's something most people don't know. Germany wasn't always called Germany. In fact, for most of history, it didn't even exist. So how did scattered tribes living deep inside Europe's forests become one of the most influential nations on Earth? And what unbelievable event forced the mighty Roman Empire to abandon its dream of conquering these lands forever? Stay with me, because this journey begins over 10,000 years ago, in a world that looks nothing like the Germany we know today. Before Germany existed. Imagine standing in Central Europe thousands of years before the first cities, kingdoms, or borders were ever drawn. The Ice Age was slowly coming to an end. Massive glaciers that had covered much of Europe for thousands of years were finally retreating. As the frozen landscape warmed, rivers began flowing once again. Dense forests spread across the land. Animals returned. And with them, human beings. These weren't kings or soldiers. They weren't building castles or armies. They were small bands of hunter-gatherers. Every sunrise meant another struggle for survival. Food had to be hunted. Shelter had to be built. Every day was uncertain. Every season could mean life or death. Over time, everything began to change. People slowly stopped wandering from place to place. Instead, they started settling near fertile rivers and valleys. They learned how to grow crops. They domesticated animals. Families became villages. Villages became communities. And little by little, the foundations of civilization appeared. Nobody could have imagined that these peaceful farming settlements would one day become the birthplace of warriors who would terrify the greatest empire in the ancient world. The rise of new cultures. As centuries passed, the people living across Central Europe developed new skills. Bronze tools replaced stone. Weapons became stronger. Trade expanded. Different cultures emerged across the region. Eventually, another major transformation arrived. The Iron Age. Iron changed everything. Stronger weapons meant stronger warriors. Communities became tribes. Powerful leaders began to rise. By the final centuries before Christ, Central Europe had already become home to two very different worlds. To the south lived the Celts. They were skilled craftsmen, traders, and farmers. Their settlements were larger. Their trade routes stretched across Europe. Meanwhile, to the north, another people were quietly growing stronger. These were the Germanic tribes. Historians believe many of their ancestors had migrated from Scandinavia generations earlier. Unlike the Celts, they weren't united under one kingdom. They lived in separate tribes, each with its own chief, its own traditions, its own warriors. Yet despite their differences, they shared something powerful: a common language, a common culture, and an unbreakable fighting spirit. At the time, no one outside these forests paid much attention to them. That would soon change, because somewhere far to the south, a rising superpower had begun looking toward these mysterious northern lands. Its name was Rome. A giant begins looking north. By the 1st century BC, the Roman Republic had become one of the strongest powers the world had ever seen. Its disciplined legions conquered kingdom after kingdom. Roads, cities, fortresses, Roman influence spread in every direction. Eventually, Rome reached the mighty Rhine River. Beyond it lay an unknown land, a land covered in forests, a land filled with tribes that refused to bow before anyone. The Romans called it Germania. To Roman generals, Germania represented another opportunity for conquest. another province waiting to be added to their growing empire. But they were about to discover something they had never truly faced before. An enemy who knew every forest, every swamp, every hidden path, and who had absolutely no intention of surrendering. One Roman commander in particular became determined to explore these lands. His name, Julius Caesar. Rome meets Germania. Julius Caesar ordered his armies across the Rhine. Roman soldiers marched into Germania carrying the confidence that had already defeated countless civilizations. Their armor gleamed. Their formations were nearly impossible to break. Their discipline was unmatched. Yet, the forests felt different. There were no great cities to capture. No royal palaces. No large roads. Only endless wilderness. And unseen enemies watching from the trees. The Germanic tribes avoided direct confrontation whenever possible. Instead, they relied on surprise, speed, and intimate knowledge of the terrain. The Romans managed several expeditions, but permanent conquest proved impossible. Still, Rome refused to give up. Years later, a new emperor would launch an even greater campaign. He believed Germania could finally be brought under Roman control. It seemed like only a matter of time. But history was about to witness one of the greatest military disasters the Roman Empire would ever suffer. A single battle would change Germany forever, and it would force the most powerful empire on earth to admit that some lands simply could not be conquered. Rome's greatest ambition. For years, Rome refused to accept defeat. A few failed expeditions weren't enough to stop an empire that believed the world belonged to it. Under Emperor Augustus, Rome had reached the height of its power. Its borders stretched across 3 continents. Its roads connected thousands of miles. Its armies had defeated kings, kingdoms, and civilizations that once seemed impossible to conquer. So why would a collection of scattered tribes living in dark forests be any different? To the Romans, Germania wasn't a threat. It was simply another land waiting to become part of the empire. Confident in their military superiority, Augustus ordered a massive campaign to finally bring Germania under Roman rule. At first, everything appeared to be going according to plan. Roman forts were built. Taxes were introduced. Local leaders were encouraged to cooperate. Some Germanic tribes even accepted Roman authority, believing peace and trade would benefit their people. From Rome's perspective, victory was only a matter of time. But beneath the surface, something far more dangerous was unfolding. A man trusted by Rome was secretly preparing its greatest humiliation. And when the trap finally closed, even the mighty Roman Empire would be left speechless. A man living between 2 worlds. His name was Arminius. At first glance, he seemed like the perfect Roman ally. Born into a Germanic tribe, he had spent years serving alongside the Roman army. He spoke their language. He understood their military tactics. He earned their trust. The Romans admired him. Some even believed he had become more Roman than German. But appearances can be deceiving. Deep inside, Arminius had never forgotten where he came from. He had watched Rome slowly tighten its grip over his homeland. He saw Roman governors treating Germanic tribes as subjects instead of allies. Heavy taxes, harsh laws, growing arrogance. The freedom his people had always cherished was beginning to disappear. Arminius realized something terrifying. If nothing changed, Germania would eventually lose its identity forever. So he made a decision that would alter the course of European history. Instead of fighting Rome openly, he would use Rome's own confidence against it. The perfect trap. Arminius secretly traveled from tribe to tribe. Many of these tribes had spent generations fighting one another. Some distrusted each other. Others were bitter rivals. Uniting them seemed almost impossible. But Arminius understood one powerful truth. A divided people could never defeat Rome. One by one, he convinced tribal leaders to put aside old conflicts. Not because they suddenly became friends, but because they all faced the same enemy. Slowly, an unlikely alliance began to form. Meanwhile, the Roman governor Publius Quinctilius Varus remained completely unaware. Varus believed Germania had already been pacified. When Arminius warned him about a supposed rebellion deeper inside the forests, Varus saw it as another routine mission, exactly as Arminius had hoped. Without realizing it, Rome had already stepped into the trap, into the forest. It was the autumn of 9 AD. 3 full Roman legions marched confidently into the dense forests of Germania. Along with thousands of soldiers came servants, families, supplies, wagons, and livestock. The marching column stretched for miles. Heavy rain soon began to fall. The roads disappeared beneath thick mud. The towering trees blocked visibility. Communication became difficult. Roman formations, usually their greatest strength, slowly fell apart. Still, Varus believed there was nothing to fear. He trusted Arminius completely. What he didn't know was that Arminius had already left the Roman camp, not to gather allies for Rome, but to prepare the attack. Hidden among the trees, thousands of Germanic warriors waited in complete silence. Every path, every hill, every narrow passage, they knew them all. The Romans knew none of them. And then, without warning, the forest exploded. The day Rome lost its confidence. Spears rained from every direction. War cries echoed through the trees. Germanic warriors charged from the shadows before disappearing just as quickly. The Roman soldiers tried forming defensive lines. But the narrow forest made organized formations impossible. Heavy armor that once symbolized Roman superiority now became a burden. Mud slowed every movement. Broken wagons blocked escape routes. Chaos spread. Hour after hour, day after day, the attacks continued. The Romans never knew where the next strike would come from. Exhaustion replaced confidence. Fear replaced discipline. The unstoppable Roman machine had become trapped inside a nightmare it couldn't control. Varus desperately searched for a way out, but every road was blocked. Every attempt to regroup failed. Eventually, realizing total defeat was unavoidable, Varus chose death over capture. He took his own life. Around him, thousands of Roman soldiers met the same fate. By the time the fighting finally ended, 3 complete Roman legions had vanished. Standards once carried proudly by Rome now lay in Germanic hands. One of the greatest military forces on earth had been destroyed, not by another empire, not by a king, but by tribes Rome had considered uncivilized. Shockwaves across the empire. News of the disaster traveled quickly to Rome. No one could believe it. Entire legions, gone. Generals, dead. Years of expansion, wiped away. The defeat wasn't simply military. It was psychological. For the first time, Rome realized there were places its power simply could not reach. Ancient writers later described Emperor Augustus as being devastated by the news. Legend says he repeatedly cried, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." Whether those exact words were spoken or not, one thing is certain. Rome had suffered one of the greatest humiliations in its history, and everything changed after that. The border that would shape Europe. Although Rome launched later campaigns seeking revenge, the dream of permanently conquering Germania slowly faded. The cost had become too high. Instead, the empire chose a different strategy. Rather than expanding deeper into the forests, Rome strengthened its borders. Massive fortifications were built along the Rhine and Danube rivers. Watchtowers rose across the frontier. Walls, forts, military roads. Together they formed one of Rome's greatest defensive systems. For centuries, this frontier separated 2 very different worlds. To the south, Roman cities flourished with stone roads, laws, markets, and grand architecture. To the north, Germanic tribes continued living according to their own customs, traditions, and warrior culture. Neither side remained completely isolated. Trade crossed the frontier. Ideas spread. Some Germanic warriors even served proudly inside the Roman army. But despite growing contact, the people beyond the border refused to become Romans. Without realizing it, their independence had just changed the future of Europe forever, yet Rome's greatest challenge was still waiting. Far beyond the eastern horizon, an unstoppable force had begun moving west. Entire civilizations would flee before them. Kingdoms would collapse. The Roman Empire itself would begin to fall apart. And the Germanic tribes would soon find themselves at the center of one of history's greatest migrations. The world they knew was about to disappear forever, the storm from the east. For generations, the Rhine River had marked the edge of the Roman world. On one side stood the greatest empire on earth. On the other, the free Germanic tribes continued living much as their ancestors had for centuries. After the disaster in the Teutoburg forest, Rome no longer dreamed of conquering Germania. Instead, both worlds learned to live beside one another. Trade flourished. Germanic merchants crossed Roman borders. Roman goods found their way into tribal villages. Pottery, weapons, fine jewelry, even new farming techniques slowly reached the Germanic peoples. Many young Germanic warriors even joined Rome's auxiliary forces. They fought alongside Roman legions, earned Roman citizenship, and returned home with wealth and military experience. Little by little, Roman influence spread beyond the frontier. But despite these growing connections, the Germanic tribes remained fiercely independent. They still worshipped their ancient gods. They still gathered around tribal chiefs. They still believed that freedom was worth more than comfort. For nearly 4 centuries, an uneasy balance existed. It seemed as though this fragile peace might last forever. But history rarely allows peace to remain for long. Far beyond Europe's eastern horizon, a terrifying new power had begun moving westward, and no one, not Rome, not the Germanic tribes, not even the greatest kings, could stop what was coming. The riders nobody could escape. Around the late 4th century, strange rumors began spreading across Europe. Entire villages disappeared overnight. Kingdoms abandoned their homes. Refugees arrived with horrifying stories. They spoke of warriors unlike anything Europe had ever seen. Lightning-fast horsemen, masters of the bow, relentless fighters who seemed to appear out of nowhere before vanishing just as quickly. These were the Huns. Their origins remain a mystery even today. Some historians believe they came from the vast grasslands of Central Asia. Others continue to debate exactly where they first emerged. But one fact is beyond dispute. Wherever the Huns appeared, fear followed. Their speed was terrifying. Entire armies struggled to catch them. Instead of fighting like traditional soldiers, they attacked without warning, then disappeared before their enemies could respond. For countless tribes living east of Germania, there was only one choice: run or be destroyed. The Great Migration begins. The arrival of the Huns triggered one of the largest movements of people in European history. Modern historians call it the migration period, but for the people living through it, it felt like the end of the world. Thousands became hundreds of thousands. Families packed everything they owned. Entire tribes abandoned lands their ancestors had lived on for generations. One after another, Germanic peoples began moving westward. Not because they wanted new homes, but because they had no other option. Every tribe fleeing the Huns pushed another tribe closer to Roman territory. Like falling dominoes, the pressure spread across Europe. Soon, the Roman Empire itself stood directly in the path of this human tide. And suddenly, the empire that had once tried to conquer Germania found itself overwhelmed by the people it had failed to defeat centuries earlier. Rome opens the gates. First, Roman officials believed they could control the situation. Some tribes were allowed to settle inside imperial territory. Others were accepted as allies. The hope was simple: give them land, recruit their warriors, strengthen the empire. For a short time, the plan appeared to work. But the sheer number of migrants quickly became impossible to manage. Food shortages spread. Corruption worsened. Roman officials often mistreated the newcomers. Promises were broken. Trust disappeared. Desperation soon turned into rebellion. The tribes that had entered peacefully began taking up arms. The Roman Empire was no longer simply facing foreign invaders. It was beginning to collapse from within. A world turned upside down. Over the next century, everything changed. The Vandals crossed into Roman Spain before eventually establishing a powerful kingdom in North Africa. The Visigoths marched across southern Europe. In the year 410 AD, they accomplished something once thought impossible. They entered Rome itself. For nearly 800 years, the Eternal City had stood as the symbol of Roman power. Yet foreign warriors walked through its streets. Palaces were looted. Temples were emptied. The unthinkable had happened. The psychological impact echoed across the ancient world. If Rome could fall, nothing was truly invincible. Elsewhere, the Angles and Saxons crossed the sea into Britain. The Burgundians established new kingdoms. And across Western Europe, Germanic rulers began replacing Roman governors. Slowly, the map of Europe was being redrawn, not by politicians, but by migration, war, and survival. The end of an empire. By the late 5th century, the Western Roman Empire had become only a shadow of its former greatness. Its armies were weaker. Its economy struggled. Its emperors changed rapidly. Real power often belonged to military commanders instead. Then, in 476 AD, history reached a turning point. The last Western Roman emperor was removed from power. With that moment, an empire that had dominated Europe for centuries officially came to an end. But history doesn't simply stop. As one civilization disappeared, another began to rise. Across former Roman lands, new Germanic kingdoms emerged. These rulers admired many parts of Roman civilization. They adopted Roman laws. They embraced Christianity. They preserved administrative systems. Instead of destroying everything Rome had built, they combined Roman traditions with Germanic culture. A completely new Europe was beginning to take shape. The rise of the Franks. Among all these new kingdoms, one tribe would prove more influential than the rest. The Franks. Originally one of many Germanic peoples living near the Rhine, they steadily expanded their power. Unlike many rival tribes, the Franks mastered something incredibly important. They knew how to unite. Under the leadership of a remarkable king, their kingdom grew stronger year after year. His name was Clovis. He wasn't simply a warrior. He was a skilled politician, patient strategist, and a leader who understood that military victories alone could never build a lasting kingdom. When Clovis accepted Christianity, he gained the support of powerful religious leaders and many former Roman citizens. His kingdom expanded rapidly. What had once been scattered tribal lands began evolving into one of Europe's greatest powers. Yet while the Franks flourished in the West, something entirely different was happening in eastern Germania, a changing homeland. As many Germanic tribes migrated into former Roman territory, vast regions in eastern Germany became sparsely populated. New peoples soon moved into these lands. Slavic tribes gradually settled across large areas east of the Elbe River. Once again, Germany's cultural landscape began to change. Old tribal boundaries disappeared. New communities emerged. Europe was becoming increasingly diverse. And the story of Germany was becoming far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. But another extraordinary leader was about to appear. A king whose ambition would reshape almost all of Western Europe. A ruler whose empire would inspire generations for over 1,000 years. His name was Charlemagne, and his dream would become the foundation for a new Germany. One king, one crown, one empire. But could a single ruler truly unite hundreds of different peoples under one banner? Or would his greatest achievement eventually tear itself apart? setting the stage for the Germany we know today. The answer would change European history forever. A new power rises. The Western Roman Empire was gone. Its mighty cities still stood. Its roads still stretched across Europe, and its churches continued ringing with prayer. But the empire that had once ruled millions had vanished into history. Across its former lands, dozens of kingdoms competed for power. Some rose quickly, only to disappear just as fast. Others were weakened by endless wars. Europe had entered an age of uncertainty. It seemed impossible that one ruler could ever unite these fractured lands again. But sometimes, history chooses an ordinary man to accomplish what others believe is impossible. And in the kingdom of the Franks, that man was about to emerge. His name was Charlemagne, a prince unlike the others. Charlemagne wasn't born into a peaceful world. He grew up surrounded by conflict. Every border was contested. Every neighboring kingdom could become tomorrow's enemy. From a young age, he learned that a king wasn't judged by the crown on his head, but by the strength of the kingdom he protected. Unlike many rulers who preferred the comfort of palaces, Charlemagne spent much of his life among soldiers. He understood battle. He understood leadership. And above all, he understood that a divided Europe would always remain vulnerable. But he wasn't interested in ruling only the Franks. His ambitions reached far beyond his own kingdom. He dreamed of creating an empire so powerful that it would rival the glory of ancient Rome itself. At the time, few believed such a dream was even possible. But Charlemagne wasn't a man who accepted limits. Building an empire, as soon as he became king, his campaigns began. Year after year, his armies marched across Europe. Some kingdoms surrendered peacefully. Others resisted with everything they had. One by one, his enemies fell. The Lombards in Italy, the Bavarians, neighboring tribes along his borders. Each victory expanded his influence. Each campaign brought new territories under Frankish control. Slowly, the scattered map of Western Europe began changing. But there was one enemy who refused to submit. People known for their courage, their independence, and their ancient traditions, the Saxons. And defeating them would become the greatest challenge of Charlemagne's entire life. 30 years of war. The Saxons lived across the forests and plains of northern Germany. They were fierce warriors, independent, proud, and deeply loyal to their old beliefs. Unlike many neighboring kingdoms, they had not embraced Christianity. They continued worshipping the gods of their ancestors. For Charlemagne, this wasn't only a political problem. It was also a religious one. He believed his empire could never truly unite while powerful pagan tribes remained outside his authority. So, war began. What many expected to be a short campaign lasted nearly 30 years. Again and again, Frankish armies entered Saxon lands. Again and again, the Saxons rebelled. Villages burned. Fortresses changed hands. Victories were followed by new uprisings. Neither side was willing to surrender. The conflict became one of the longest and bloodiest struggles of the early Middle Ages. The price of unity. Charlemagne's determination never weakened. Each rebellion was met with greater force. Each victory strengthened Frankish control. Some Saxons accepted Christianity willingly. Others resisted until the very end. Entire communities faced impossible choices: submit or continue fighting. The wars left deep scars across northern Germany. Families were divided. Ancient traditions disappeared. New churches rose where pagan shrines once stood. It was a brutal chapter in European history, yet it also transformed Germany forever. By the end of the conflict, the Saxons had become part of Charlemagne's growing empire. For the first time, much of Western and Central Europe stood under a single ruler. His dream was becoming reality, but destiny had prepared an even greater honor, one that would make his name immortal. Christmas Day, 800 AD. The city of Rome was filled with celebration. Church bells echoed through the streets. Thousands gathered inside St. Peter's Basilica. No one fully understood what was about to happen. As Charlemagne knelt in prayer, Pope Leo III approached him. Then, before the eyes of the crowd, the Pope placed a magnificent crown upon Charlemagne's head. He proclaimed him Emperor of the Romans. For the first time in more than 3 centuries, the imperial title of Western Europe had returned. To many people, it felt as though the Roman Empire had been reborn. Not exactly as it once was, but as something entirely new. Charlemagne had become the most powerful ruler in Western Europe. His empire stretched across lands that today belong to France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria, and northern Italy. No king had united so much of Europe since the fall of Rome. More than a conqueror. But Charlemagne wanted more than military victories. He believed knowledge was just as important as power. Across his empire, he encouraged education. Schools were established. Churches became centers of learning. Ancient books were copied and preserved. Scholars from different regions gathered at his court. Art, science, architecture, and literature slowly flourished once again. Historians later called this period the Carolingian Renaissance. Although it wasn't as famous as the Renaissance that would come centuries later, it helped preserve much of Europe's knowledge during a difficult age. Charlemagne understood something many rulers never did. Empires built only with swords eventually fall. Empires built with ideas can survive for generations. The end of a great king. For decades, Charlemagne ruled one of the largest empires Europe had seen. His authority seemed unshakable. But no king lives forever. In 814 AD, after years of remarkable achievements, Charlemagne died. He was buried in the city of Aachen, the place he had chosen as the heart of his empire. Europe mourned the loss of a legendary ruler. Yet even before his funeral ended, a difficult question remained. Who could possibly hold together such a vast empire? History had already shown that conquering land was one thing. Keeping it united was something entirely different. An empire divided. Charlemagne's successors struggled to maintain his legacy. Powerful nobles demanded greater independence. Family rivalries grew stronger. Finally, in 843 AD, his grandsons reached an agreement. Instead of preserving one empire, they divided it into 3 separate kingdoms. It seemed like a practical solution, but this single decision would reshape Europe forever. The Eastern Kingdom, known as East Francia, would eventually evolve into what we now recognize as Germany. At that moment, no one could imagine it. It was simply one kingdom among many. But history had quietly taken another step toward the birth of a future nation. Charlemagne's empire had disappeared, but his dream refused to die. Soon, a new dynasty would rise. The fearless king, followed by an even greater emperor, would once again unite much of the German lands. And from their achievements, one of history's strangest political creations would emerge. An empire that called itself Holy Roman, and yet was neither entirely holy nor truly Roman. What exactly was the Holy Roman Empire? And why would it dominate Central Europe for nearly 1,000 years? That remarkable story. An empire is gone, but its legacy lives on. When Charlemagne died, Europe didn't fall into chaos overnight. His empire was still vast. Its armies still stood. The cities still thrived. But something had changed. The one man capable of holding everything together was gone. Without his powerful leadership, old rivalries returned. Noble families competed for influence. Regional rulers demanded more independence. And the unity Charlemagne had spent a lifetime building slowly began to crumble. The dream of one great empire seemed to be fading. Yet history has a strange way of reviving forgotten dreams. From the ruins of Charlemagne's empire, a new chapter was about to begin. One that would shape Germany for the next 1,000 years. the division that changed Europe. In 843 AD, Charlemagne's grandsons signed the Treaty of Verdun. Instead of fighting endlessly over the empire, they divided it into 3 kingdoms. To the west, West Francia gradually evolved into modern-day France. The Middle Kingdom stretched from the North Sea to Italy but remained politically unstable. The eastern lands, known as East Francia, became home to many German-speaking peoples. First, East Francia wasn't a united country. It was a collection of powerful duchies. Saxony, Bavaria, Franconia, Swabia, and Lotharingia. Each had its own powerful nobles, its own traditions, its own ambitions. The king ruled, but local dukes held enormous power. Keeping them united would prove incredibly difficult. A kingdom under constant threat, East Francia faced danger from every direction. To the north, Viking raiders attacked coastal settlements with terrifying speed. From the east, the fierce Magyar horsemen launched devastating raids deep into Europe. To the south, political rivalries constantly threatened stability. Many wondered whether East Francia would survive at all. The kingdom needed more than a ruler. It needed a leader strong enough to unite competing nobles and defend its borders. In the year 919 AD, that leader finally emerged. His name was Henry the Fowler. The rise of Henry the Fowler. Henry wasn't crowned because he belonged to Charlemagne's family. Instead, the German dukes chose him as their king. That decision marked an important turning point. For the first time, leadership depended not only on bloodline, but also on the respect of Germany's most powerful nobles. Henry understood that forcing unity through fear alone would never last. Instead of immediately crushing every rival, he built alliances. He negotiated. He earned loyalty. But when enemies threatened his kingdom, he showed no hesitation. Henry strengthened fortifications across East Francia. New defensive towns were built. Military training improved. Local forces became better organized than ever before. Most importantly, he prepared his kingdom for an enemy unlike any Europe had seen. The Magyars, the riders from the east. The Magyars were feared across Europe. Like the Huns before them, they were expert horsemen, fast, disciplined, deadly with bows. Their surprise attacks devastated villages and cities alike. For decades, European kingdoms struggled to stop them. Many simply paid tribute to avoid destruction. Henry refused. Instead, he spent years rebuilding his army. He knew rushing into battle would end in disaster. Patience, preparation, and discipline would be his greatest weapons. When the time finally came, East Francia was ready. Henry successfully resisted Magyar invasions, giving his kingdom something it hadn't enjoyed in years: hope. But it would be his son who would deliver the decisive victory that changed history forever. Otto the Great. When Henry died in 936 AD, his son Otto I inherited the throne. Unlike many young rulers, Otto quickly proved himself worthy of the crown. He faced rebellions from powerful nobles, family rivalries, foreign invasions. Yet one by one, he overcame every challenge. Otto believed Germany needed something greater than temporary peace. He envisioned a kingdom powerful enough to lead all of Central Europe. But before that dream could become reality, he first had to defeat the Magyars once and for all. The battle that saved Europe. The decisive moment arrived in 955 AD. Near the city of Lechfeld, Otto's army confronted the invading Magyar forces. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Otto failed, East Francia might collapse. If he succeeded, history would change forever. The battle was fierce. Dust filled the air. Arrows darkened the sky. For hours, both armies fought relentlessly. Then, Otto's disciplined heavy cavalry launched a devastating counterattack. The Magyar army broke. Their retreat turned into complete defeat. It wasn't just another military victory. It ended generations of devastating Magyar raids into Central Europe. For countless people, Otto became the defender of Christian Europe. His reputation spread across the continent. Kings admired him, church leaders praised him, and soon, an even greater honor awaited. A new emperor is crowned. Only a few years later, Otto marched into Italy. There, he restored political stability and strengthened his influence over the region. In 962 AD, inside St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, history repeated itself. The Pope placed a crown upon Otto's head. He was proclaimed Holy Roman Emperor. It was a symbolic moment unlike any other. Charlemagne's imperial vision had returned. But this time, its center of power lay firmly within the German kingdom. From this point onward, Germany became the heart of a new political order, an empire that would endure, in one form or another, for almost 1,000 years, an empire unlike any other. Despite its impressive title, the Holy Roman Empire wasn't a single united nation. It was something far more complicated. Dozens, then hundreds, of duchies, bishoprics, counties, and free imperial cities existed within its borders. Each governed itself to varying degrees. Each protected its own interests. The emperor stood at the top, but his authority often depended on negotiation rather than absolute power. Unlike the emperors of ancient Rome, Holy Roman emperors couldn't simply command every region. They constantly balanced alliances, religious influence, and the ambitions of powerful princes. This unique political system would shape Germany's identity for centuries. It created remarkable cultural diversity, but also prevented complete national unity. The seeds of future conflict had already been planted. A civilization begins to flourish. Despite its political complexity, the empire experienced remarkable growth. New trade expanded. Agriculture improved. Monasteries became centers of education. Stone churches rose above growing communities. Pilgrims, merchants, craftsmen, and scholars traveled more freely than ever before. Germany wasn't simply becoming stronger militarily. It was becoming one of Europe's cultural and economic centers. Yet beneath this progress, a silent struggle continued. Every emperor dreamed of strengthening central authority. Every prince fought to protect local independence. This battle, between unity and division, would define Germany for hundreds of years. The Holy Roman Empire had become one of Europe's greatest powers, but its greatest challenge was still ahead. Powerful emperors would rise. Magnificent cathedrals would transform the skyline. Trade would enrich entire cities. Yet behind the beauty, ambition, and faith, a political system unlike any other would slowly begin to fracture. Could the emperors truly unite Germany? Or would the princes grow so powerful that even the emperor himself would struggle to control them? The answer would shape the destiny of Europe for centuries. The dream lives on. When Otto the Great was crowned Holy Roman Emperor, it felt as though Germany had finally found its destiny. A powerful emperor, a growing kingdom, and an empire that stretched across the heart of Europe. Many believed this was only the beginning. Perhaps Germany would become another mighty Rome, a single nation, ruled by one emperor, under one crown. But history had other plans, because the Holy Roman Empire was unlike any empire the world had ever seen. From the outside, it looked powerful. Inside, it was quietly pulling itself apart. And that hidden weakness would shape Germany's future for centuries. A kingdom of hundreds. Imagine trying to rule not one country, but hundreds. Not hundreds of villages, hundreds of powerful states. Some were duchies. Some were bishoprics ruled by powerful others were wealthy free cities. Many had their own armies, their own laws, their own rulers, even their own ambitions. Every prince believed his land should remain independent. Every duke wanted more influence. Every bishop protected the interests of the church. The emperor stood above them all, but his authority depended more on persuasion than absolute command. He wasn't simply giving orders. He was constantly negotiating, making alliances, settling disputes, trying to balance dozens of competing interests. It was like holding together a giant puzzle, whose pieces never wanted to fit. A new age begins. Despite its political complexity, the empire entered a remarkable period of growth. The population increased. Forests were cleared. New farmland appeared across Central Europe. Entire towns emerged where wilderness had once stood. Stone bridges replaced wooden crossings. Markets became busier. Trade routes expanded farther every year. Germany was slowly transforming. Small villages evolved into thriving medieval towns. Craftsmen built workshops. Blacksmiths forged stronger tools. Merchants carried goods across Europe. People no longer thought only about survival. Now, they dreamed about prosperity. But every step forward created another challenge. The richer the regional rulers became, the less willing they were to obey the emperor. The emperor in the red beard. Then came one of the Holy Roman Empire's most legendary rulers. His name was Frederick I. History remembers him by another name, Frederick Barbarossa. Barbarossa meaning the red beard. Stories about him spread across Europe. Some described him as fearless. Others admired his intelligence. Many believed he was destined to restore the full glory of the empire. Barbarossa understood something few rulers before him had realized. Germany could never become truly powerful unless the emperor regained authority over the princes. So he began strengthening imperial power. He traveled constantly across the empire, holding courts, settling disputes, rewarding loyal nobles, punishing rebellious ones. Whenever necessary, he marched with his armies, not only against foreign enemies, but sometimes against his own princes. His goal wasn't revenge. His goal was unity, the Italian dream. But Barbarossa wanted something even greater. Like Charlemagne and Otto before him, he looked toward Italy. Northern Italy had become wealthy. The cities prospered through trade. Many of them had grown increasingly independent. Barbarossa believed these cities should obey the emperor. The cities believed otherwise. Conflict became inevitable. Again and again, Barbarossa crossed the Alps. Again and again, he fought to restore. Victories were followed by setbacks. Cities surrendered, only to rebel later. Power shifted constantly. Although Barbarossa remained one of Europe's strongest rulers, even he couldn't fully control such a vast empire. It was becoming clear that no emperor, no matter how talented, could completely unite Germany, a land of builders. While rulers fought for power, ordinary people quietly transformed Germany. Towering Gothic cathedrals began rising across the landscape. Each one seemed to reach toward the heavens. Master builders spent decades, sometimes even centuries, completing these magnificent structures. Churches became more than places of worship. They became symbols of pride, symbols of wealth, symbols of faith. Cities competed with one another, each hoping to build something even grander than its neighbors. Some cathedrals became architectural masterpieces that still stand today, reminding the world of medieval Germany's extraordinary craftsmanship. Knowledge begins to flourish. At the same time, another revolution was taking place. Not on battlefields, but inside classrooms. Learning slowly returned to Europe. Monasteries preserved ancient books. Scholars copied valuable manuscripts by hand. Young students traveled great distances to study. Then, universities began to appear. One of the most important was founded in Heidelberg in 1386. Students gathered there to study law, medicine, philosophy, and theology. Knowledge was becoming power. Ideas traveled faster than ever before. Germany wasn't only producing warriors anymore. It was producing thinkers, writers, scientists, and future leaders. The foundation of Germany's intellectual strength was quietly being built. The merchants of the north. While scholars filled universities, German merchants transformed European trade. Across the Baltic and North Seas, powerful trading cities formed an alliance. It became known as the Hanseatic League. Cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, and Bremen became centers of commerce. Ships loaded with timber, grain, salt, cloth, and precious goods crossed northern Europe. German merchants established trading posts far beyond their homeland. Business created enormous wealth. Entire cities flourished. Some became richer than many kings. Trade wasn't just changing the economy. It was changing society itself. A new class of wealthy merchants began challenging the traditional power of nobles. Money, not only birth, was becoming a source of influence. The emperor grows weaker. Ironically, as Germany became richer, its political unity became weaker. Every successful prince wanted greater independence. Every prosperous city demanded more rights. Every powerful bishop defended church authority. The emperor still wore the crown, but controlling the empire became increasingly difficult. Then, in 1356, everything changed. Emperor Charles IV issued one of the most important laws in German history. It became known as the Golden Bull. The Golden Bull. For generations, the question had caused endless conflict. Who had the right to choose the next emperor? Kings fought over it. Princes argued endlessly. Civil wars sometimes erupted. The Golden Bull finally established clear rules. From then on, 7 powerful princes would elect every future Holy Roman Emperor. It brought greater political stability, but it also gave enormous power to Germany's regional rulers. The emperor could no longer ignore them. Without their support, no one could wear the imperial crown. In solving one problem, the empire had created another. Germany had become even more decentralized. Its princes stronger, its emperor weaker. The dream of one united kingdom drifted farther away. A nation without a nation. By the late Middle Ages, people across the German lands spoke similar languages. They shared many customs. Many worshipped in the same churches. Merchants traded together. Students studied together. Knights fought side by side during crusades. Yet politically, Germany remained divided. Hundreds of different rulers governed hundreds of different territories. To outsiders, it often seemed confusing. How could one empire contain so many independent states? The answer was simple. The Holy Roman Empire wasn't built like ancient Rome. It survived through compromise. And compromise, while keeping the peace, often prevented true unity. But soon, another force would appear. Not an army, not an emperor, not a king. One man, armed only with words, would shake the entire empire to its foundations. His ideas would divide Germany more deeply than any sword ever could a monk. A hammer, and a church door. What happened next would ignite one of the greatest religious revolutions in human history. Kings would choose sides. Neighbors would become enemies. And Germany would descend into generations of conflict. The age of the Protestant Reformation was about to begin the greatest battle, without a sword. For centuries, the Holy Roman Empire had survived political rivalries, power struggles, and countless wars. Emperors fought princes. Kings fought neighboring kingdoms. Yet somehow, the empire always endured. But the next great conflict wouldn't begin on a battlefield. There would be no marching armies, no charging knights, no castles under siege. Instead, it would begin with an ordinary monk, a few sheets of paper, and one question that millions of people had never dared to ask. What if the church itself had lost its way? No one realized it at the time, but this single question would split Germany in two, ignite generations of war, and permanently change the course of European history. An empire at its peak. By the early 1500s, Germany appeared stronger than ever. Bustling cities echoed with the sounds of merchants, craftsmen, and scholars. Trade flowed across rivers and mountain passes. Universities attracted students from every corner of Europe. New ideas were spreading faster than ever before. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Holy Roman Empire was entering a new golden age. Emperor Maximilian I introduced reforms designed to strengthen imperial law and improve administration. Many believed Germany was finally moving toward greater unity. But beneath this image of stability, something was quietly boiling. Ordinary people were growing frustrated, not with their emperor, but with one of the most powerful institutions in Europe, the Catholic Church. Growing frustration. For centuries, the Church had shaped nearly every part of daily life. Crowned kings, blessed armies, collected taxes, owned vast amounts of land. Its influence stretched into every village and every city. For many believers, the Church represented hope and salvation. But over time, some leaders within the Church became increasingly criticized. Stories spread about corruption, about wealthy officials living in luxury, about ordinary people paying money for spiritual favors. One practice became especially controversial: the selling of indulgences. Church representatives claimed that by purchasing these certificates, people could reduce punishment for sins. Many sincere Christians began asking themselves, could forgiveness really be bought with money? Among those deeply troubled by this question was a German monk named Martin Luther. He had no army, no wealth, no political power, yet his words would shake Europe more than many kings ever could. The day everything changed. It was the year 1517. Martin Luther had spent years studying the Bible. The more he read, the more convinced he became that many church practices had drifted away from Christian teachings. After months of reflection, he decided to make his concerns public. He wrote a document containing 95 arguments, now famously known as the 95 Theses. According to tradition, he nailed them to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. Whether every detail of that story happened exactly as later described is still debated by historians. But one fact is beyond dispute: his ideas spread with astonishing speed. Luther had hoped for discussion. Instead, he unintentionally sparked a revolution, the machine that changed history. Only decades earlier, another German had made an invention that would transform the world. His name was Johannes Gutenberg. In the city of Mainz, he perfected the movable type printing press. Before this invention, books had to be copied by hand. Producing a single manuscript could take months, sometimes years. Only the wealthy could afford them. But now, everything changed. Books, pamphlets, letters, and religious writings could be printed by the thousands. Ideas no longer traveled slowly. They spread like wildfire. Luther's writings reached towns, villages, universities, and royal courts across Europe. Within months, millions had heard his message. For the first time in history, one man's ideas could influence an entire continent almost overnight. The printing press had become the most powerful weapon of the age. Germany begins to divide. Not everyone welcomed Luther's message. Many remained loyal to the Catholic Church. Others believed Luther had exposed serious problems that needed reform. Soon, Germany found itself divided. Not by language, not by culture, but by faith. Northern and Eastern German princes increasingly supported Luther. Some genuinely believed in his teachings. Others also saw an opportunity. By embracing Protestantism, they could reduce the influence of both the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor over their territories. Meanwhile, many southern and western the empire that had already been politically was now becoming religiously divided as well. A clash of conscience. The Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, viewed Luther's movement as a serious threat to imperial unity. Church leaders demanded that Luther withdraw his writings. He was summoned before the imperial assembly known as the Diet of Worms in 1521. It was an incredibly dangerous moment. Standing before some of the most powerful men in Europe, Luther was ordered to renounce his beliefs. He knew the consequences. Refusing could mean imprisonment or even death. The room fell silent. All eyes were fixed upon the monk. Then Luther gave an answer that would echo through history. He declared that unless convinced by scripture and clear reason, he could not abandon what he believed to be true. He said, with those words, there was no turning back. Luther became an outlaw, but his movement only grew stronger. A new faith emerges. Across Germany, churches began changing. Services were conducted in local languages instead of Latin. The Bible was translated into German so ordinary people could read it for themselves. Education became increasingly important. Families were encouraged to study scripture together. A new branch of Christianity, known as Protestantism, was taking root. For many believers, it represented religious renewal. For others, it threatened centuries of tradition. The disagreement spread far beyond theology. It affected politics, education, culture, and even family life. Neighbors who had lived peacefully together for generations now worshipped differently. Old friendships fractured. Entire communities found themselves divided. An uneasy peace. Years of political tension and military. Neither side could achieve complete victory. Eventually, leaders realized that endless war could destroy the empire itself. In 1555, representatives reached an agreement known as the Peace of Augsburg. Its central principle was simple. Each prince would decide whether his territory would follow Catholicism or Lutheran Protestantism. The compromise brought temporary stability, but it also created a dangerous reality. Religion had become tied directly to political power. Every ruler's decision affected thousands of lives, and many other Christian groups remained excluded from the agreement. Peace had returned, but only on the surface. Beneath it, old tensions continued to grow. Like glowing embers beneath ashes, they waited for the smallest spark. That spark would finally come in 1618. One argument, one act of defiance, and one window. What followed would become one of the deadliest wars Europe had ever witnessed. Entire cities would vanish. Millions would die. And Germany, the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, would become the greatest battlefield of them all, a peace that was never truly peace. The Peace of Augsburg had ended one chapter of conflict, but it hadn't healed the wounds. Instead, it merely covered them. Like cracks hidden beneath fresh paint, the divisions inside the Holy Roman Empire continued to grow. Catholics distrusted Protestants. Protestants feared Catholic rulers. Princes competed for power. Foreign kingdoms watched closely, waiting for the perfect opportunity to interfere. For decades, Germany stood on the edge of disaster. Everyone hoped another major war could be avoided. But history has a cruel habit. Sometimes, peace lasts only until someone lights the first spark. And in 1618, that spark finally came. One window that changed Europe. The city of Prague was tense. Religious disagreements had reached a breaking point. Protestant nobles believed their freedoms were under threat. Negotiations collapsed. Tempers exploded. Then, something extraordinary happened. A group of angry Protestant leaders stormed Prague Castle. They confronted two imperial officials loyal to the Catholic emperor. The argument quickly spiraled out of control. Moments later, the officials were thrown from a high castle window. Miraculously, they survived the fall, but the damage had already been done. That single event, known today as the Defenestration of Prague, ignited one of the longest and bloodiest wars Europe had ever experienced. What began as a local political dispute would soon consume an entire continent. Germany becomes the battlefield. As alliances formed, the conflict spread rapidly. Catholic kingdoms entered. Protestant states responded. Foreign powers saw opportunities to weaken old rivals. Soon, armies from across Europe marched into the German lands. Spain, Austria, Sweden, France, Denmark, countless German princes. Each pursued different goals. Some fought for religion, others for power. others simply to expand their territory. Ordinary people hardly understood why the war continued. They only knew one thing. No matter who claimed victory, they were the ones paying the price. A country torn apart. Germany became the center of the storm. Villages disappeared beneath smoke. Fields that once produced food became battlefields. Roads filled with refugees carrying everything they could save. Children searched desperately for them. Families fled into forests. Many never returned. The soldiers themselves often without supplies. They survived by taking food from local communities. Homes were looted, livestock stolen, entire harvests destroyed. For civilians, there was nowhere truly safe. Every distant sound could mean another army approaching. Every sunrise brought fresh uncertainty. The invisible enemies. But war wasn't the only killer. As food supplies vanished, famine spread across the countryside. Weak bodies became vulnerable to disease. Plague, typhus, and other deadly illnesses swept through towns already devastated by conflict. Doctors had little understanding of how to stop the outbreaks. Hospitals overflowed. Church bells rang constantly for the dead. Entire villages became silent. Not because people had left, but because no one remained alive. The suffering became almost impossible to imagine. Many survivors later wrote that death had become an ordinary part of daily life. Hope. 30 years of darkness. 1 year passed. Then another. Then another. Still, the fighting continued. Children born after the war began grew into adults before it finally ended. An entire generation knew nothing except conflict. Some regions changed hands multiple times. Every new army brought fresh destruction. Every new victory was followed by another defeat. No side could achieve complete success. Yet no side was willing to surrender. What had begun as a religious conflict gradually transformed into a struggle for political dominance across Europe. Religion remained important, but power had become even more important. The war no longer belonged to one nation. It belonged to an entire continent. Germany pays the highest price. By the 1640s, the Holy Roman Empire had been shattered. Large parts of Germany lay in ruins. Once thriving cities struggled to survive. Countless farms stood abandoned. Trade had collapsed. Entire regions lost enormous portions of their population. Historians continue debating the exact numbers. But many estimate that millions of people died during the conflict through a combination of warfare, starvation, and disease. Some areas lost nearly half. Imagine walking through villages where no smoke rose from chimneys, where church doors remained closed, where fields returned to wilderness because there was no one left to cultivate them. Germany had become almost unrecognizable. The scars would remain visible for generations. The Peace of Westphalia. Finally, after 3 decades of unimaginable suffering, Europe's leaders accepted a painful truth. There could be no total victory. In 1648, representatives gathered in the cities of Münster and Osnabrück. After years of negotiation, they signed what became known as the Peace of Westphalia. The agreement ended the 30 Years' War, but its importance reached far beyond ending a single conflict. The treaty recognized the rights of many German princes to govern their own territories with greater independence. The authority of the Holy Roman Emperor became even more limited. Religious coexistence gained broader legal recognition. And perhaps most importantly, the Peace of Westphalia introduced ideas about state sovereignty that would influence international politics for centuries to come. The modern diplomatic world was beginning to take shape. A broken empire. Although peace had returned, Germany remained deeply divided. Hundreds of principalities, bishoprics, free cities, and duchies continued governing themselves. The Holy Roman Empire still existed, but it had become weaker than ever. The emperor wore the imperial crown. Yet real power increasingly belonged to regional rulers. Some historians later described the empire as a giant mosaic. Beautiful, complex, and incredibly fragile. Still, from this shattered landscape, New powers quietly began rising. Two states in particular started growing stronger than all the others. One in the south, one in the north. For the next 2 centuries, their rivalry would dominate German history.